After a freak coffee shop accident, a burned-out corporate accountant wakes up inside the modern romance novel she was skimming on her commute. She hasn't transmigrated as the sweet, clumsy female lead, but as Harper, the obsessed, perfectly manicured, evil ex-fiancée, destined to be publicly ruined. According to the plot, Harper is supposed to cry, throw a glass of wine, and dedicate her life to destroying the CEO's new relationship with his intern. Instead, Harper reads the breakup contract, realizes there is a $50 million buyout clause for a clean split, and gleefully cashes the check to retire early. But her absolute indifference and sudden financial genius completely derails the story. The cold CEO Damien becomes wildly obsessed with the woman who just walked away, and the innocent, in turn, turns out to be a ruthless corporate spy that only Harper can outsmart. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. The first thing I noticed was the oppressive smell of white truffles. The second thing I noticed was the 10-carat diamond ring practically cutting off the circulation to my left ring finger. I blinked, my vision coming into focus. I was sitting at a candlelit table in a restaurant that looked so expensive the napkins were probably insured. Sitting across from me was a man who looked like he had been genetically engineered in a lab designed to produce billionaire romance novel tropes. He had jet black hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes as cold as a Siberian winter. "Harper," he said, his deep voice dripping with sheer, unadulterated boredom. "I am ending our engagement." My brain violently rebooted. Harper? Engagement? Before I could ask if he had mistaken me for someone else, my gaze dropped to the table. Between the silver oyster forks and the crystal wine glasses sat a thick manila folder. The name printed on the tab read Damien Vance. A cold chill ran down my spine. Damien Vance. Harper. The breakup dinner at La Toile. I hadn't just passed out in the middle of a double shift at my accounting firm. I had transmigrated straight into the billionaire's innocent intern, the atrociously cliché web novel I'd been reading on the subway. Which meant I was currently occupying the body of Harper Kensington, the evil, clingy, high society villainess who was about to spend the next 80 chapters humiliating herself to win back a man who possessed the emotional depth of a teaspoon. In the book, Harper responds to this exact moment by throwing a glass of vintage Merlot in his face, screaming that he will never love his new intern, and vowing to destroy his company. This kicks off her inevitable ruin. "I know this is difficult for you to process," Damien continued, leaning back in his chair and adjusting his bespoke cuffs. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and extreme annoyance. "I have found someone else. Someone pure. Someone who doesn't care about my money. I've had my lawyers draft a separation agreement. If you agree to walk away quietly, without a public scandal, there is a substantial severance package." He slid the folder across the table. I stared at him. Then I opened the folder. I bypassed the legal jargon and flipped straight to the settlement amount. My accountant brain immediately registered the numbers. 50. 6 more zeros. $50 million. In the novel, Harper rips this check to shreds out of pure, agonizing love. I looked at the check. Then I looked at the 10-carat ring on my finger, which had to be worth at least another $2 million. Then I looked at Damien, who was bracing himself for me to start screaming. "Just to clarify," I said, my voice perfectly level, "this is tax-free? And the penthouse on Fifth Avenue is fully transferred to my name." Damien froze. The defensive, icy glare slipped off his face, replaced by absolute confusion. "Yes. The penthouse is yours. Harper, are you crying?" "Only tears of joy, Damien," I said, pulling a pen out of my designer clutch. I flipped to the back page and signed my name on the dotted line with a flourish. I closed the folder, slid it into my bag, and slipped the giant engagement ring off my finger. I set the ring gently next to his oyster fork. "I wish you and the intern a lifetime of happiness," I said cheerfully, standing up and smoothing out my silk dress. "Please tell your lawyers I expect the wire transfer by 9 a.m. on Monday. Enjoy the truffles." I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the cold, brilliant CEO staring after me with his mouth slightly open. The plot was officially broken, and I was about to be absurdly rich. Chapter 1. I woke up the next morning in a bed that cost more than my entire college education. The Fifth Avenue penthouse was a monument to Damien Vance's personality. Cold, entirely devoid of color, and overwhelmingly expensive. Everything was made of brushed steel, white marble, or black leather. It looked less like a home, and more like the lobby of a high-end villain headquarters. I sat up, stretched my arms, and let out a deep, soul-cleansing breath. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have to commute on a crowded subway. I didn't have to audit a miserable tech startup's fabricated tax returns. I didn't have to deal with a boss who pronounced the T in espresso. I threw off the silk duvet, grabbed the incredibly heavy manila folder from my nightstand, and padded barefoot into the stainless steel kitchen. I fired up the espresso machine, pulled out the sleek, silver laptop sitting on the kitchen island, and opened Excel. It was time to do what I did best. I created a new spreadsheet. Cell A1 total assets. Cell B1, $50 million. I stared at the screen, taking a sip of my perfectly brewed coffee. It wasn't a dream. The wire transfer had cleared at 8:05 a.m. My bank account currently had more commas in it than a classic Russian novel. Suddenly, the sleek, obnoxious smartphone on the counter started buzzing like a swarm of angry hornets. I leaned over and tapped the screen. I had 84 unread text messages. Most of them were from the original Harper's high society friends. A terrifying coven of socialites whose names all sounded like expensive bottled water brands. Evian. OMG Harper. Page 6 just leaked the breakup. Are we keying his Aston Martin today? Fiji. Tell me you hired a private investigator to ruin that little intern's life. I have a guy. Dasani. We are wearing all black to the charity gala tonight to mourn your stolen youth. Drink water, don't cry. In the original web novel, Harper responds to these texts by organizing a highly illegal smear campaign against the sweet, clumsy intern Lily. This directly leads to Damien freezing Harper's credit cards and publicly humiliating her at said charity gala. I highlighted the entire group chat, hit block, and tossed the phone back onto the counter. I had $50 million. The last thing I was going to do was spend my Tuesday keying a car like a scorned teenager. I opened a new tab on my browser and typed in Malibu beachfront real estate, fully furnished, no brushed steel. By noon, I had digitally signed the paperwork to sell the depressing Fifth Avenue penthouse to a 22-year-old crypto billionaire who loved the serial killer chic aesthetic. By 2 p.m., I had purchased a sprawling, sun-drenched, four-bedroom house in Malibu with a wraparound deck overlooking the Pacific Ocean. By 6 p.m., I was on a first-class flight to Los Angeles, wearing cashmere sweatpants and drinking free champagne. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in New York City, Damien Vance was experiencing an emotion he had never felt before. Complete and utter bewilderment. As I would later learn from his highly traumatized executive assistant, Damien had spent his entire Tuesday bracing for impact. He had alerted building security. He had put his PR team on standby. He had even warned Lily the intern to stay away from the office windows in case I tried to throw a rock through them. He expected screaming. He expected a lawsuit. He expected me to show up at his office wearing a revenge dress and demanding his head on a platter. Instead, the only thing Damien Vance received from me was an automated email from my new real estate lawyer at 4:30 p.m., politely informing him that the keys to the penthouse had been left under the welcome mat and reminding him to cancel the internet bill. The villainess had officially retired. Chapter 2. Life in Malibu was exactly what my exhausted, overworked soul needed. For 2 glorious weeks, my daily schedule consisted of waking up at noon, drinking a green smoothie that tasted faintly of lawn clippings but cost $40, and sitting on my wraparound deck watching the Pacific Ocean. I traded my tailored corporate suits for oversized linen shirts and aggressively large sun hats. I was a $50 million ghost. Of course, old habits die hard. You can take the accountant out of the miserable cubicle, but you can't stop her from reading quarterly SEC filings for fun. I was lounging on a plush outdoor sofa, my laptop resting on my knees, idly tracking the tech sector. In the original web novel, Damien Vance's company, Vance Industries, practically ruled the global market. But as I scrolled through the morning financial reports, I noticed something deeply weird. A rival tech conglomerate, Zenith Corp, had just filed 3 massive patents overnight. I pulled up the schematics. I frowned, pushing my sunglasses up my nose. The patents were for a highly advanced, next-generation AI processing chip. The exact same chip that Vance Industries had spent the last 2 years developing in absolute secrecy. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing Zenith's sudden R&D surge with Vance Industries' internal press leaks. According to a tiny, buried gossip column, the Vance R&D floor had experienced a minor security breach last week when a new intern accidentally dropped a stack of classified blueprints near an open window. An intern. I let out a loud, sudden bark of laughter, startling a seagull on my railing. Lily. The sweet, innocent, incredibly clumsy intern who had stolen Damien's icy heart. In the novel, her clumsiness was an adorable character trait that constantly resulted in Damien having to catch her when she tripped over the office rugs. In reality, she wasn't clumsy at all. She was a corporate spy funneling stolen tech to Zenith Corp under the guise of being aggressively incompetent. Wow, I muttered, taking a sip of my iced latte. Damien Vance, billionaire genius, is currently dating a Trojan horse. For exactly 3 seconds, I felt a twinge of pity for my cold, emotionally stunted ex-fiancé. Then I remembered he was a billionaire who had tried to buy my silence, and the pity immediately evaporated. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I thought cheerfully, closing the financial tab. Let Damien's empire burn. I had a beach to walk on. I opened a new window and went to the checkout page for a ridiculously expensive, imported Italian espresso machine I had been eyeing. It cost more than my first car, but I was rich now. I hit complete purchase. A little red error box popped up. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution. I blinked. I re-entered my glossy, black titanium card number. Transaction declined. A cold, familiar knot of corporate anxiety formed in my stomach. I picked up my phone and dialed my newly acquired private wealth manager at the offshore bank. He picked up on the first ring. Good morning, Miss Kensington, he chimed. How is the California sun? It's great, Richard. Listen, my card just declined. Did my daily limit reset improperly? Richard hesitated. It was the kind of hesitation that usually preceded the words tax audit. Miss Kensington. I was just about to call you. There. Seems to be a hold on your primary accounts. A hold. I repeated, my voice dropping 10 degrees. Richard, there are $50 million in that account. What kind of hold? A federal one, I'm afraid, Richard squeaked. Vance Industries' corporate accounts were flagged at midnight for suspected massive intellectual property theft and SEC violations. Because your severance package was a direct, lump sum wire transfer from their primary holding account just 2 weeks ago. The feds have temporarily frozen your funds as collateral pending an investigation. The deck went completely silent, save for the crashing of the waves. Temporarily, I said softly. Yes, ma'am. They estimate the forensic accounting review will take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. Your funds are perfectly safe. You just cannot access them. At all. Until Vance Industries clears their name. I hung up the phone. I stared out at the beautiful, sparkling ocean. I looked at the error message on my laptop screen. Lily the intern wasn't just stealing from Damien anymore. Her little espionage side hustle had just cut off my access to my hard-earned, perfectly legal severance package. She had messed with my money. I stood up, walked calmly into my massive walk-in closet, and pulled my sleekest, sharpest black power suit off the hanger. The vacation was over. I was going back to New York, and I was going to financially ruin an intern. Chapter 3. The global headquarters of Vance Industries occupied an intimidating, 70-story glass monolith in the heart of Manhattan. Usually, entering the lobby felt like walking into a cathedral of capitalism. Today, however, it felt like walking into a crime scene. I pushed through the revolving doors wearing my sharpest black power suit, a pair of oversized Prada sunglasses, and a pair of stilettos that sounded like gunshots against the marble floor. The security guard stationed at the turnstile saw me coming and visibly panicked. One of them actually reached for his radio. Miss Kensington, the head guard stammered, stepping into my path. I'm sorry, but Mr. Vance's office left strict instructions. You aren't allowed in the building. I lowered my sunglasses, looking at the man over the rims. Frank, your pension is tied to the Vance Industries stock options, correct? Frank blinked, completely derailed. Yes, ma'am. And considering the stock plummeted 9% this morning due to a federal investigation, your retirement fund is currently bleeding to death, I stated cleanly. I am here to stop the bleeding. If you don't let me through, I will personally hold you liable for the cost of my time. My consulting rate is $4,000 an hour. Move. Frank practically threw himself out of the way, swiping his master keycard to open the turnstile. Have a great day, Miss Kensington. You too, Frank. Diversify your portfolio. I called over my shoulder, stepping into the private executive elevator. When the doors opened on the 70th floor, the executive suite was in absolute chaos. Junior executives were running down the halls clutching files, The PR team was yelling into headsets, and outside the massive glass walls of the main boardroom, 3 federal agents were casually drinking the company coffee. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak doors of the boardroom open so hard they slammed against the walls. Inside, the atmosphere was funereal. Damien sat at the head of the massive obsidian table, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his jaw covered in a faint shadow of stubble. Surrounding him were the chief financial officer, the head of cybersecurity, and his entire legal team. Every single head snapped up to look at me. Harper. Damien breathed, standing up so fast his heavy leather chair rolled backward. His cold eyes widened in sheer shock. What are you doing here? Well, Damien, I said cheerfully, dropping my designer handbag onto the polished table with a heavy thud. I was trying to buy an Italian espresso machine for my beach house, but unfortunately, my card was declined. So I'm here to audit your entire company. The CFO, a nervous-looking man named Gregory, let out a strangled cough. Ms. Kensington, this is a highly confidential crisis meeting. Gregory, you missed a glaringly obvious shell corporation routing $3 million of R&D funds out of your Cayman accounts last Tuesday. I interrupted, pulling a thick highlighted spreadsheet out of my bag and sliding it down the table. You lost your confidentiality privileges when the SEC froze my severance package. Damien stared at the spreadsheet, then at me. Your severance was frozen? Collateral damage from your catastrophic security breach, I said, walking slowly around the table until I was standing right next to him. I leaned over, tapping a manicured nail against the paper. Zenith Corp filed 3 patents yesterday for your new AI chip. The feds think you're running a massive insider trading scam. But you aren't running a scam. You're just an idiot. The head of cybersecurity bristled. Excuse me? Our firewalls are military grade. We haven't had a digital breach in 5 years. You didn't have a digital breach, you absolute clown, I countered, looking at the man like he was a particularly slow toddler. You had a physical one. A flash drive. In the copy room on the 42nd floor. The firewall logs I hacked into on my flight over here show a manual override code was used at 11:45 p.m. last Thursday. You hacked our firewall? Damien asked, his voice entirely hollow. It wasn't hard, Damien. Your password is Vance Tech 1. It's embarrassing. I turned my attention back to the spreadsheet. At 11:45 p.m. on Thursday, the night shift security guard took his mandated 15-minute smoke break. Someone used a level 4 clearance keycard to enter the copy room, plug a drive directly into the mainframe, and download the unencrypted blueprints. The room was deathly silent. Damien's eyes were locked on my face, searching for the screaming, wine-throwing socialite he had broken up with 2 weeks ago. He was finding a ruthless, numbers-obsessed predator instead, and it was entirely short-circuiting his brain. Who? Damien asked quietly. His voice had lost all its icy arrogance. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that made the CFO visibly flinch. Why don't we ask the only person who was on the 42nd floor at that time? I suggested. The same person who conveniently tripped and spilled coffee on the server rack 3 days prior to disable the backup cameras. The same person who holds your heart, Damien. Damien went perfectly still. Lily. Ding ding ding. I said, slow clapping twice. Your sweet, innocent intern is a corporate spy for Zenith Corporation. Now I want my $50 million unfrozen. Sit down, open your laptop, and give me access to the general ledger. We have an espionage trap to build. Chapter 4. I didn't wait for Damien to give me permission. I walked around the massive obsidian table, hip-bumped his paralyzingly expensive leather chair out of the way, and leaned over his laptop. Move, I ordered. Damien, a man who regularly made Fortune 500 executives cry for sport, silently slid a foot to the left. I began typing, my fingers flying across the keys in a furious rhythm. Your security team is useless, by the way. When I hacked the corrupted security files on my flight, I didn't just watch them. I dropped the raw footage into a timeline, color-graded the shadows to pull the exposure up on the copy room corner, and slapped a custom tracking note on Lily's so-called accidental coffee spill. Frame by keyframed frame, her clumsiness completely disappears. It was a perfectly calculated, 45-degree angle pour directly into the server exhaust fan. I hit enter, bypassing the executive firewall, and pulling up a blank invoice template on his screen. Damien was staring at the side of my face like I had suddenly sprouted a second head. You color-graded the security footage. The lighting on the 42nd floor is atrocious, Damien. It was washing out her reflection. I replied absently, typing in my newly minted offshore consulting LLC. Anyway, the point is Lily is highly trained. If you fire her now, she'll just vanish, Zenith Corp will deny everything, and my $50 million will stay locked in a federal vault until we're all in nursing homes. So what is your strategy? Damien asked. His voice was dropping into that low, dangerously quiet register he usually reserved for ruthless corporate takeovers. He was leaning entirely too close to my shoulder, his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of boardroom panic. My strategy, I said, hitting print, is that you are going to continue dating her. The printer whirred to life in the corner of the room. Damien went perfectly still. The CFO, Gregory, let out a small, terrified squeak and slowly backed out of the boardroom, shutting the door behind him. You want me to keep dating the woman who is actively attempting to destroy my company? Damien asked, his blue eyes narrowing. Oh please, she's not destroying the company. She's just stealing a microchip. I waved a hand dismissively. Yes. You're going to take her to dinner. You're going to buy her flowers. You are going to look deeply into her deceiving, doe-like eyes and tell her how different she is from your terrible, money-hungry ex-fiancé. You need to keep her comfortable, so we can track the data packets she's sending back to Zenith. I walked over to the printer, grabbed the warm sheet of paper, and slapped it onto Damien's chest. He instinctively caught it. What is this? He asked, looking down. An itemized invoice, I said smoothly. For my time. My standard consulting fee is $4,000 an hour, plus an emergency retainer, and a line item for the emotional distress of having to wear stilettos on a Tuesday. Net 30 days, Damien. I accept wire transfers. Damien stared at the piece of paper. In the original novel, this was the exact moment Harper was supposed to fall to her knees, sobbing, begging him to choose her over the sweet intern. She was supposed to throw a tantrum about how much she loved him. Instead, I was billing him for my presence. A strange, unfamiliar sound echoed in the quiet boardroom. It took me a second to realize what it was. Damien Vance was laughing. It wasn't a polite, media-trained chuckle. It was a deep, chest-rumbling laugh that completely broke his icy, unbothered facade. He looked up at me, his eyes practically burning with a sudden, intense fascination. You want me to date her? Damien repeated, taking a step closer to me. The space between us suddenly felt incredibly small. Are you entirely sure you won't be jealous? Jealous? I scoffed, crossing my arms. Damien, I live in Malibu now. I have a wraparound deck and a very deep emotional connection with my offshore portfolio. The only thing I am jealous of is the nap I could be taking right now. Right on cue, the heavy boardroom door swung open. Damien? Is everything okay? I saw the federal agents in the lobby and I got so scared. It was Lily. She was wearing an oversized beige sweater that practically swallowed her, looking like a terrified woodland creature. She stumbled slightly over the threshold, perfectly executing the clumsy girl routine. When she looked up and saw me standing next to Damien, her eyes widened. Harper? What are you doing here? I'm an independent auditor, I said brightly, offering her a terrifying, shark-like smile. Just fixing some numbers. Actually, I was just leaving. Damien and I were just discussing where he should take you for dinner tonight. Have a lovely evening, you two. I grabbed my designer bag, strutted past a bewildered Lily, and left the cold, brilliant CEO staring after me, completely and utterly fascinated. Chapter 5. The annual Vance Industries Innovation Gala was a masterclass in corporate vanity. Held at the Museum of Modern Art, it featured a guest list of billionaires, an open bar serving champagne that cost more than my first car, and a centerpiece display containing the Decoy AI microchip prototype. I was currently stationed in the glass-walled VIP mezzanine, overlooking the glittering ballroom like a very well-paid gargoyle. Damien had insisted I attend to monitor the trap. I had immediately invoiced him an additional black tie hazard fee, which I assume he paid, though I couldn't check since the Fed still had my accounts locked down. I was wearing a backless, floor-length silk gown in a deep sapphire blue, mostly because it had hidden pockets. In one pocket, I had a miniature earpiece connecting me to the security feed. In the other, I had 3 mini quiches I had stolen from a passing waiter. You're eating again, Damien observed, stepping into the mezzanine. He looked infuriatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, the kind of handsome that would usually make the heroine of a novel trip over her own feet and blush furiously. I just swallowed my quiche and brushed a crumb off my silk bodice. I'm billing you for my time, Damien, but I refuse to expense my own dinner, I replied, pulling out my phone. I had synced the museum's security cameras to a private server. Where is the asset? Lily is currently by the ice sculpture, pretending she doesn't know which fork to use for the caviar, Damien said, standing beside me. He didn't look at the ballroom below. He was looking directly at me. She accidentally spilled champagne on the lead investor 10 minutes ago. Classic misdirection. I nodded approvingly, tapping my screen. She's establishing a pattern of incompetence so that when the prototype goes missing, no one suspects the girl who can't hold a glass. It's highly efficient. You admire her, Damien said. I admire her work ethic, yes. I loathe her effect on my stock portfolio. I zoomed in on camera 4. Down below, Lily was hovering near the reinforced glass case holding the decoy chip. It was guarded by 2 massive security personnel, but I knew Zenith Corp's extraction protocol relied on a digital bypass, not a smash and grab. She needs a level 5 biometric clearance to open that case, Damien murmured, stepping closer. The VIP lounge was dimly lit, and the heat radiating off him was entirely distracting. The only people with that clearance are me and the head of R&D. And you, I pointed out, pulling up a second window on my phone, left your master keycard in your tuxedo jacket when you went to the restroom 20 minutes ago. I did, he confirmed, his voice dropping to a low rumble. Just as you instructed. Excellent. Then all we have to do is wait for her to clone it. We stood in silence for a few minutes. I popped the second mini quiche into my mouth. Damien watched me chew with an expression of intense, agonizing curiosity. In the 3 years we were together, Damien said slowly, you never ate appetizers. You told me carbohydrates were a sign of moral failing. The old Harper was deeply misguided, I said, wiping my fingers on a cocktail napkin. And probably incredibly hungry. Do you know how hard it is to plot the destruction of your enemies on an empty stomach? Damien let out a soft huff of amusement, leaning his shoulder against the glass wall. You know, Harper, there are 50 women in that ballroom down there who would kill for 5 minutes in this VIP lounge with me. They care about the money. They care about the power. That's a lovely story, Damien. Write it in your journal, I said, not looking up from my screen. Camera 2. She's moving toward the coat check. He didn't look at camera 2. He took a step closer, crowding my personal space, completely ignoring the fact that his company was currently being robbed. And yet, you walked away from $50 million without shedding a single tear. And now you're treating me like an annoying coworker. You are an annoying coworker, I corrected. Technically, you're my employer right now, which is worse. HR would have a field day with how close you're standing to me. I own the company. I am HR. That is exactly why corporate monopolies are dangerous, I shot back, finally turning to look at him. His face was inches from mine. His icy blue eyes weren't cold at all anymore. They were burning with a dark, intense heat that made my heart do a highly illogical, unaccountant-like stutter. He raised his hand, his thumb gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. You aren't jealous of Lily, Damien whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips. Not even a little bit. I am currently tracking Lily's IP address through a proxy server. I breathed, trying very hard to remember how oxygen worked. I don't have time to be jealous. What if I want you to be? Before I could process the sheer, ridiculous audacity of that statement, my earpiece emitted a sharp, high-pitched beep. I instantly stepped back, putting 3 feet of solid, professional distance between us. I looked down at my phone. The digital trap had been sprung. We have a ping, I announced, my voice dropping back to a crisp, professional clip. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but I refused to let him see it. The decoy keycard was just cloned. The data packet is being transmitted to an offshore server in Geneva. Damien blinked, shaking his head slightly as if snapping out of a trance. The ruthless CEO persona snapped back into place. Did we trace the IP? I didn't just trace it, I mirrored it, I said, offering him a wicked smile. Zenith Corp just downloaded a massive file containing highly encrypted, completely useless recipes for my grandmother's meatloaf. And in return, I just slipped a Trojan horse into their mainframe. We have them, Damien. Damien stared at me, completely awestruck. He looked at the ballroom below, then back at me. We need a cover story, he said suddenly, to explain why we are spending so much time together while my legal team builds the case against Zenith. If Lily gets suspicious that we're working together, She'll scrub the drives before the feds can secure a warrant. A cover story, I repeated, narrowing my eyes. What kind of cover story? Damien's predatory smirk returned in full force. The gala press is already downstairs. We go down there, and we announce that the breakup was a misunderstanding. A temporary lover's spat. We are officially re-engaged. I stared at him in sheer horror. Absolutely not. I am not putting that 2-ton diamond back on my finger without a contract. Then draft one, Miss Kensington, Damien challenged, his eyes gleaming. Bill me. Chapter 6. At 8 a.m. the morning after the gala, I sat at the obsidian table in Damien's boardroom, sliding a freshly printed, 12-page document across the glass. What is this? Damien asked, holding a cup of black coffee and eyeing the thick stack of paper like it was a live grenade. This is the temporary re-engagement strategy and compensation agreement, I stated smoothly, capping my pen. If we are going to sell this fake reconciliation to Lily, the board, and the press, we are doing it on my terms. Read it. Carefully. Damien set his coffee down and picked up the contract. He was back in his ruthless CEO armor. A sharp charcoal suit and a perfectly knotted silk tie, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed the fact that he had spent the entire night coordinating with the feds to trace my grandmother's meatloaf recipe through Zenith Corp servers. He flipped to the second page. Section 3. Physical proximity and optics. I call it the no-touching clause, I clarified, leaning back in my chair. If we are in the presence of the target, Lily, or the press, physical contact is permitted strictly to sell the narrative. However, you will be billed for it. Damien's eyebrows shot up. Hand-holding, $500 per minute. Waist-grabbing, $1,000 per occurrence. Longing, dramatic stares. He paused, looking over the top of the paper at me. Categorized under emotional manipulation. Flat rate of $2,000 per stare? You have very intense eyes, Damien. It's a workplace hazard, I said, entirely deadpan. I also included a minimum distance requirement of 18 inches when we are alone in the executive suite. I don't need you hovering over my laptop while I trace offshore shell companies. Harper, this is extortion, Damien murmured, though the corner of his mouth was twitching violently as he fought a smile. It's capitalism, I corrected. Flip to page 8. The Daily Retainer. Damien flipped to page 8. He stared at the number. He stared at it for a long time. In the novel, Harper would have done this for free. She would have kissed the ground he walked on just to have the title of fiancé back. This daily rate, Damien said slowly, is more than I pay my chief financial officer in a quarter. Gregory missed a $3 million R&D leak. Frankly, you're overpaying him. I countered, crossing my arms. Are you going to sign it, or should I book my flight back to Malibu and leave you to explain to the feds why you're innocent in turn just stole your flagship product? Damien didn't argue. He didn't even try to negotiate. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out his solid gold fountain pen, and signed the bottom of the final page with a massive, sweeping signature. I blinked. I had fully expected him to balk at the price. You didn't even read the clause about the cancellation fees. I don't plan on canceling, he said smoothly. He tossed the contract back across the table. Then he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. He popped it open. The 10-carat diamond ring sat inside, glittering obnoxiously under the fluorescent boardroom lights. If we are going to sell this, Damien said, stepping around the table, we need to make it convincing. He stopped exactly 18 inches away from me, respecting the boundary clause with infuriating precision. He held out the ring. I sighed, extending my left hand. Put it on. But just so you know, the clock starts ticking the second we walk out that door. Damien took my hand. That was a longing stare. I breathed, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Invoice me, Damien whispered. Before I could calculate the exact charge for the sheer volume of romantic tension he had just weaponized against me, the heavy boardroom door swung open. Damien, the morning press briefing is. It was Lily. She was holding a stack of files, wearing a floral dress that made her look like a confused bridesmaid. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at my left hand. Her jaw practically hit the floor. Harper. Lily gasped, the files slipping slightly in her hands. I thought you were broken up. Damien didn't miss a beat. He smoothly stepped into my space, wrapping a possessive arm around my waist and pulling me flush against his side. A minor misunderstanding, Damien said, his voice dripping with aristocratic ice. Harper and I have resolved our issues. The engagement is back on. Please inform the PR department, Lily. Of course, Mr. Vance, Lily stammered, her eyes darting nervously between us. She looked entirely panicked. Not because she had lost the man she supposedly loved, but because the CEO's terrifying, numbers-obsessed fiancé was back in the building. As Lily scurried out of the room to alert the press, and undoubtedly her handlers at Zenith Corp, I looked up at Damien. That waist grab is going on the invoice, I muttered. Worth every penny, he murmured, refusing to let go. Chapter 7. The climax of our high-stakes corporate espionage sting occurred on a Thursday at 2:14 a.m. Damien's corner office was entirely dark, save for the blue light emanating from my laptop screen, and the glittering New York skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was sitting in Damien's absurdly comfortable CEO chair. Damien was standing directly behind me, leaning over my shoulder to watch the code scrolling across the screen. You are currently violating the 18-inch proximity clause, I whispered, not taking my eyes off the monitor. I'm tacking a $200 surcharge onto your daily rate. Add a zero, Damien murmured, his breath warm against the shell of my ear. Zenith servers just realized they spent millions of dollars to steal a recipe that requires 2 cups of breadcrumbs. He was right. The Trojan horse I had smuggled into Zenith Corp's mainframe was currently feeding me their internal communications. Panic was erupting in their R&D department. They had just pinged their inside asset, Lily, demanding the physical prototype immediately before the feds could close in. Which led us to the trap. Earlier that afternoon, I had accidentally left a memo on the copy machine stating that the physical AI chip was being temporarily stored in the biometric safe hidden behind a ridiculously cliché abstract painting in Damien's office. She's on the move, I announced, watching a blinking red dot on the building's security schematic. She just bypassed the 48th floor security checkpoint. She'll be here in 2 minutes. Under the desk, Damien ordered softly, stepping back. I grabbed my laptop, and we both slid underneath the massive, solid mahogany desk, plunging ourselves into complete darkness. The space was meant for one person's legs, not 2 full-grown adults. I ended up practically sitting in Damien's lap, my back pressed flush against his chest. I am billing you for this entire spatial violation, I hissed, my heart rate spiking as his arms wrapped securely around my waist to pull me out of sight. Put it on my tab, he breathed, resting his chin on top of my head. A moment later, the heavy glass doors of the office hissed open. Soft, deliberate footsteps padded across the carpet. Through the small gap between the desk and the floor, I could see a pair of tactical black boots. Gone were the sensible, clumsy flats Lily usually wore. She moved with terrifying, silent efficiency. No tripping. No dropping files. She walked straight to the abstract painting, pulled it off the wall, and went to work on the biometric safe. She attached a small, glowing decryption device to the keypad. It whirred softly, cycling through algorithms until the heavy steel door clicked open. Lily reached inside. I wouldn't touch that, Damien's voice rang out, cold and sharp, echoing in the dark room. I reached up and slammed my hand onto the master light switch panel hidden under the desk. The office was instantly flooded with blinding, fluorescent light. Damien and I climbed out from under the desk, smoothing our clothes. Lily spun around. The sweet, innocent-in-turn persona was entirely gone. Her posture was rigid, her doe eyes were narrowed into dangerous slits, and she was holding a sleek, silenced pistol. Well, Lily sneered, her voice entirely devoid of its usual high-pitched squeak. I have to admit, Vance, I didn't think you had the brains to catch me. You were too busy staring at my legs all quarter. In the web novel, this was the moment Damien's heart shattered into a million pieces. He was supposed to look at her with agonizing betrayal, devastated that the pure, innocent girl he loved was a monster. Instead, Damien just looked profoundly bored. I wasn't staring at your legs, Lily, Damien said smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. I was staring at your horrifically inefficient filing system. You miscategorized 3 months of tax documents. It was giving me a migraine. Lily's eye twitched. Shut up. Where is the real prototype? It's currently in a secure federal vault in D.C., I chimed in, leaning against the desk. And the item you just grabbed out of that safe is a GPS-enabled die pack. The kind they use in banks. Lily looked down at the small, rectangular box in her hand. Pew-pee. A cloud of blinding, neon pink powder exploded outward, entirely coating Lily's tactical gear, her hands, and her face. She shrieked. dropping the box and frantically wiping at her eyes. Right on cue, the boardroom doors burst open, and 6 federal agents swarmed the office, tackling a very pink, very angry corporate spy to the ground. As the agents read Lily her rights and hauled her out of the room, she glared at me over her shoulder. "You got lucky, Kensington. You're just a spoiled, shallow socialite." "I'm a certified public accountant, you amateur." I called back. "Keep your hands off my severance package." The office fell silent as the agents cleared out, leaving just Damien and me standing in the aftermath of the neon pink explosion. I let out a long breath, snapping my laptop shut. Well, the espionage threat is neutralized. The feds have their Zenith Corp connection. I assume my $50 million will be unfrozen by Monday. I turned to look at Damien. He wasn't looking at the door, or the safe, or the pink powder covering his expensive rug. He was looking at me. His icy blue eyes were completely dilated, burning with an intensity that practically set the air on fire. There was no heartbreak over his intern's betrayal. There was only pure, unadulterated awe. "You," Damien said, taking a slow step toward me, "are the most terrifying, magnificent creature I have ever met." "I'm just highly motivated by financial stability," I corrected, my pulse suddenly doing a frantic tap dance in my throat. "I don't care what motivates you," he murmured, closing the distance between us until he was standing entirely within the 18-inch boundary. He reached out, his warm hands cupping my face. "I am never letting you leave this company again." Chapter 8. By 9 a.m. on Monday, my life was officially back in perfect, mathematical order. I sat at the polished mahogany desk in the empty executive suite, refreshing my offshore banking app. A little green checkmark appeared. The federal hold was lifted. My $50 million plus the newly wired consulting fees were sitting safely in my accounts, entirely untouched by Zenith Corp or the federal government. "Perfect," I whispered, closing the laptop. I reached into my designer tote bag, pulled out a manila folder, and placed it exactly in the center of Damien's desk. Inside was a final, itemized invoice marked paid in full, alongside the 10-carat diamond ring. The espionage threat was neutralized. The fake engagement contract had fulfilled its purpose. My work here was done, and the beaches of Malibu were calling my name. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the ultra-exclusive first-class lounge at JFK Airport, sipping a complimentary mimosa, and waiting for my direct flight to Los Angeles. I had traded my terrifying corporate armor for a pair of oversized linen trousers and a silk blouse. I was half asleep, mentally arranging the furniture on my wraparound deck, when a sudden commotion broke out near the lounge entrance. "Sir, you cannot bypass the desk without a boarding pass," an airline attendant shrieked. "I literally own the aerospace manufacturing company that built this plane. Move," a deeply familiar, terrifyingly calm voice commanded. I froze, my mimosa halfway to my mouth. The frosted glass doors of the lounge flew open. Damien Vance strode into the room, scanning the crowd of wealthy travelers like a predator looking for a very specific target. He didn't look like a cold, unbothered CEO. He looked completely unhinged. He was wearing a dark suit, but he had abandoned his tie entirely. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair looked like he had run his hands through it about 40 times in the last hour. His icy blue eyes locked onto me sitting in the corner booth. He marched across the lounge, completely ignoring the stares of 3 hedge fund managers and a minor celebrity. He stopped in front of my table, his chest heaving slightly. He looked down at me, then slammed the manila folder I had left on his desk onto the table. "What is this?" Damien demanded, his voice tight. "It's an invoice, Damien. I know reading comprehension isn't your strong suit, but we went over this," I said, setting my champagne flute down. "The job is done. The feds have Lily. The Zenith threat is contained. I am going back to retirement." "You left the ring," he pointed out, his jaw ticking. "The contract explicitly stated the engagement was temporary." I reminded him, crossing my arms. "I don't work for free, and I certainly don't stay engaged to billionaires for charity. My flight boards in 20 minutes. Damien stared at me, the last remaining walls of his icy, robotic CEO persona completely shattering right there in the middle of the JFK first-class lounge. He dropped into the leather chair across from me, running a hand over his face. "I was an idiot," he said. The words were so quiet I almost didn't catch them over the jazz music playing over the speakers. I blinked. "Excuse me." Damien leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, entirely invading my personal space. "Before you changed. Before you walked out of that restaurant, and billed me for breathing. I treated you like a liability. I was so obsessed with the company and my own arrogance that I almost threw away the most brilliant, ruthless, utterly captivating woman I have ever met. I stared at him, my snarky comeback completely dying in my throat. My heart gave a sudden, violent lurch against my ribs. Damien. I started, my voice wavering just a fraction. I'm apologizing, Harper, he said, his intense blue eyes locking onto mine, entirely stripped of their usual armor. I am apologizing for being a blind, cold fool. And I am begging you to rip up that final invoice. I can't rip it up, it's already been filed with the IRS, my accountant brain automatically supplied, ruining the romantic tension. Damien let out a breathless, desperate laugh, reaching across the table to grab my hand. His thumb traced my knuckles, a blatant violation of the now expired proximity clause. Then draft a new contract, he murmured. Make me your permanent client. Marry me. For real this time. No fake PR stunts, no intern spies, no itemized billing for waste grabs. Just you and me, taking over the world. I looked at his hand holding mine. I looked at the man who had abandoned a boardroom to chase me through an airport terminal. He was utterly entirely ruined for anyone else. And to my absolute horror, I realized I was ruined for anyone else too. I live in Malibu now, Damien, I whispered, trying to hold on to my last shred of logic. I have a very nice espresso machine. I am not moving back into that miserable, steel-plated penthouse. Damien didn't even hesitate. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, and held it to his ear. Gregory, Damien barked into the phone. Cancel all my meetings for the next month. Contact legal, and have my primary residence transferred to California. Also buy me a surfboard. I don't know, Gregory, figure it out. He hung up, tossing the phone onto the table, and looked back at me with a triumphant smirk. It looks like I have a sudden opening in my schedule for a West Coast merger, Damien said smoothly. Now are we getting on this plane, or do I need to buy the entire airline to delay the flight? Chapter 9. 3 days later, my peaceful Malibu sanctuary had been thoroughly compromised by the presence of a billionaire who didn't know how to relax. I was sitting on the plush outdoor sofa on my wraparound deck, entirely focused on executing a flawless, invisible seamless join on a bucket hat I was making out of imported merino wool. It was a soothing mathematical puzzle of loops and tension, and frankly, far more rewarding than auditing tax returns. Damien, on the other hand, was pacing the length of the deck like a caged panther. He had clearly attempted to adapt to the West Coast aesthetic. He was barefoot, and he had traded his Tom Ford suits for a pair of cream linen trousers and a navy button-down shirt. I don't care if the shipping lane is congested, Gregory, Damien barked, his bare feet pacing past my lounge chair for the 15th time. By the shipping lane. No, I am not coming back to New York. I am conducting crucial executive business in California. Handle it. He tapped his earpiece, ending the call, and let out a heavy sigh, staring out at the Pacific Ocean as if he were trying to figure out how to acquire it. Damien, I said calmly, not looking up from my yarn. You are scaring the seagulls. You're projecting hostile corporate energy into my Zen space. He turned to look at me. His eyes darted from the ocean, to my bare feet propped up on the table, to the half-finished bucket hat in my hands. What are you doing? He asked, stepping closer. He looked at the yarn like it was a foreign artifact. I am crocheting, I replied, pulling the loop tight. It lowers blood pressure. You should try it. Your resting heart rate is currently pacing at a Wall Street panic level. Damien frowned, crossing his arms. I am perfectly relaxed. I am wearing linen, Harper. This is my relaxed attire. You look like you're about to fire a cabana boy, I pointed out. Why are you still working? I thought you took a month off to finalize our personal merger. I am multitasking, Damien defended himself, though he finally stopped pacing and sank onto the sofa next to me. The cushion dipped under his weight. He leaned over, watching my hands move with intense, analytical focus. Your tension consistency is remarkable. The structural integrity of that hat is highly efficient. I stopped hooking and looked at him. Did you just analyze my crochet project like a supply chain metric? I appreciate flawless execution when I see it, he murmured, his voice dropping into that low, distracting register. He reached out, his long fingers gently brushing the soft merino wool resting on my knee. The casual graze of his knuckles against my skin sent a sudden, electric jolt up my leg. He knew exactly what he was doing. The no-touching clause was dead and buried, and Damien was taking full advantage of his new immunity. "You're a menace," I breathed, trying to refocus on my seamless join. Before he could weaponize his jawline again, a massive, aggressive seagull landed on the glass railing with a loud squawk. It stared directly at Damien, its beady little eyes entirely devoid of fear. Damien narrowed his eyes at the bird. The bird squawked again. "Shoo," Damien commanded, using his CEO voice. The voice that made grown men tremble in boardrooms. The seagull did not tremble. It hopped closer to the patio table, eyeing a leftover piece of sourdough toast from my breakfast. "Harper, your perimeter security is severely lacking," Damien noted, leaning forward to glare at the bird. "It's assessing our assets." "It's a bird, Damien. It wants the toast." "It's a hostile invader," Damien corrected, standing up to his full intimidating height. He pointed a firm finger at the seagull. "I will buy this entire coastline and have you evicted. Walk away." I buried my face in my hands, laughing so hard my shoulders shook. The great, terrifying Damien Vance, titan of industry, was currently in a turf war with a coastal bird. The seagull, entirely unimpressed by the threat of real estate monopolization, snatched the sourdough toast in its beak and flew off into the breeze. Damien watched it go, his hands planted on his hips in sheer disbelief. Did that just happen? I just got robbed. In my own territory. "Welcome to Malibu," I wheezed, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "Next time, you have to offer it a stock option." Damien turned back to me, the irritation melting off his face the second he saw me laughing. He walked slowly back to the sofa, but instead of sitting next to me, he knelt down on the wooden deck right in front of my knees. He gently plucked the crochet hook and the wool out of my hands, setting them on the table. Then he rested his hands on my waist, pulling me slightly forward until I was right at the edge of the cushion. "I can handle the aggressive wildlife," Damien murmured, looking up at me through his dark lashes. "I can handle the sand and the linen, and the fact that you refuse to wear shoes. But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" I whispered, my heart suddenly doing a frantic flutter. "Never go back to the accountant firm," he said softly, a genuine, vulnerable honesty shining in his icy eyes. "Stay here. Build this life with me. You can crochet an entire wardrobe of highly efficient bucket hats, and I will fund it, as long as I get to wake up next to you." I looked down at the man who had completely derailed my quiet retirement, realizing I didn't want it to be quiet anymore. "Only if you unbutton the top 2 buttons of that shirt," I demanded. "You're stressing me out." Damien's signature, predatory smirk finally returned. "Negotiation accepted," he whispered, leaning up to kiss me. Chapter 10. The honeymoon phase of our Malibu corporate retreat lasted exactly 4 days, before the real world violently kicked the door in. We were in the kitchen, engaged in a highly intense debate over whether making pasta from scratch was a romantic domestic activity or a severe waste of time. I voted waste of time. Damien argued it was a calculated culinary investment. When his secure executive phone began to ring, it wasn't the standard ringtone. It was the blaring, high-pitched alarm reserved for level 1 corporate emergencies. Damien's playful smirk vanished instantly. He wiped flour off his hands, grabbed the phone off the marble counter, and hit speaker. "Report Gregory." Gregory, the CFO, sounded like he was hyperventilating into a paper bag. "Damien, it's Zenith Corp. The espionage sting wasn't their only play. The microchip theft was a distraction." "A distraction from what?" Damien demanded, his voice dropping to absolute zero. "A hostile takeover," Gregory wheezed. While the feds were focused on Lily and the R&D floor, Zenith's proxy firm started aggressively buying up our floating stock. They just filed a Schedule 13D with the SEC. They own 9% of Vance Industries, and they are making a tender offer directly to the shareholders at 20% over market value to get the majority vote. The kitchen went dead silent. The flour settled on the counter. "They are trying to buy my company out from under me," Damien said softly. It was the kind of soft that usually preceded a massive explosion. He looked at me, his icy eyes completely hardened. "Gregory, stall the board. Do not let anyone sign anything. I am flying back to New York tonight." "You aren't flying anywhere," I interrupted, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel, and walking past him into the living room. Damien followed me, his brow furrowed. "Harper, this is a hostile takeover. If they secure 51% of the voting shares, they can liquidate my entire executive team and scrap the company for parts." "I am aware of how a takeover works, Damien. I am a certified public accountant, I said, flipping open my silver laptop and grabbing an HDMI cable to plug it directly into the massive, 80-inch smart TV mounted on the wall. But you can't fight a digital acquisition from a private jet over Nebraska. We are fighting them right here. I hit a few keys, and the massive television screen lit up. It didn't look like a standard, boring financial spreadsheet. It looked like a highly complex, color-coded web of glowing data points, lines, and animated graphs. Damien paused, staring at the screen. What is that? That isn't the Bloomberg terminal. No, it's a custom UI I built last week, I said, my fingers flying across my keyboard as I pulled Zenith Corp's latest SEC filings into the program. Spreadsheets are too slow for real-time tracking, so I started applying video editing logic to financial data. I linked the livestock ticker data through custom fusion nodes. I clicked and dragged a cluster of data points on the screen, visually isolating Zenith's aggressive buying patterns. Forget the background noise of the standard market fluctuations, I muttered, aggressively keyframing a timeline that tracked the shell companies buying up the Vance stock. We just need to look at the proxy firm Zenith is using to hide their tracks. Look at this. I highlighted 3 seemingly unrelated LLCs on the screen. They tried to obfuscate their holding accounts, but the routing numbers all trace back to the same offshore origin. I just wrote a macro to remove the watermark, the fake corporate identities they stamped on these shell companies, and strip the data down to the core. I hit enter. The screen zoomed in, linking all the dummy companies directly to the Zenith Corp CEO's personal investment trust. Gregory, who was still on speakerphone, let out a choked gasp. My God, she just mapped a global corporate conspiracy in 3 minutes using, what did she call it? Fusion nodes. Damien didn't answer Gregory. He stepped closer to the television screen, completely mesmerized by the glowing web of financial destruction I had just orchestrated in his Malibu living room. Then he turned his head and looked at me. You, Damien murmured, his voice thick with absolute reverence, are a terrifying genius. I am a woman protecting her investments, I corrected. Now Gregory, listen to me closely. Zenith is offering a 20% premium to the shareholders, which means they are highly leveraged. They are borrowing cash to try and buy us out. Yes, ma'am, Gregory squeaked obediently. So we are going to initiate a counter buyout, I announced, turning to face Damien. We aren't just going to block their takeover. We are going to buy their debt. Damien's eyes widened slightly as the sheer ruthlessness of the strategy clicked into place. A Pac-Man defense. We swallow them before they swallow us. Exactly, I grinned, feeling the familiar, intoxicating rush of corporate warfare. But Vance Industries can't use its own capital right now without triggering an SEC audit because of the ongoing espionage investigation. Which means we don't have the liquid cash to execute the counter buyout, Damien realized, his jaw tightening. You don't, I corrected softly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my offshore banking app. I pulled up the balance. $50 million. I have $50 million in completely untraceable, legally cleared severance money, I told him, looking up into his icy blue eyes. I will front the capital to buy Zenith's debt. But in exchange, I want 50% of the voting shares of the newly merged conglomerate. Gregory let out a quiet whimper of terror on the phone. Damien looked at the glowing UI on the television, then down at the screen of my phone, and finally at my face. A slow, deeply arrogant, entirely devoted smile spread across his face. Harper, Damien whispered, walking over and wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. I would give you 100% if you asked for it. 50 is fine, I murmured, wrapping my arms around his neck. Hang up on Gregory, Damien. We have a hostile takeover to execute. Chapter 11. It was 3 a.m. The Malibu living room looked less like a beach retreat, and more like the war room of a rogue nation. Empty cartons of expensive, imported sushi littered the coffee table alongside 3 empty French press coffee carafes. The 80-inch television was still glowing, projecting the custom financial UI across the dark room. I was sitting cross-legged on the plush rug, my fingers resting on the laptop keyboard. Damien was sitting on the floor right behind me, his back leaning against the sofa, his long legs bracketing mine. His arms were draped loosely around my waist, his chin resting heavily on my shoulder. We were watching a little green progress bar on the screen inch toward 100%. If Zenith's CEO is awake right now, he is currently experiencing the worst heartburn of his life. I murmured, my voice raspy from exhaustion. He deserves it, Damien rumbled against my collarbone. He tried to touch my company. More importantly, he interrupted my vacation. The progress bar hit 100%. A massive, satisfying ping echoed from the laptop speakers. The glowing data points on the television shifted, the red nodes of Zenith Corp turning a cool, Vance Industries blue. Transfer complete, I announced, dropping my head back against Damien's shoulder with a heavy sigh of relief. My $50 million just effectively bought out Zenith's primary credit lines. They are officially bankrupt, and we now own their entire tech portfolio, including the AI chip they tried to steal. Damien let out a low, breathy laugh. He reached up, gently taking the laptop off my lap and setting it safely on the coffee table next to the sushi. Then he pulled me flush against his chest, wrapping his arms tightly around me. "You did it," he whispered, pressing a kiss to the side of my neck. "You saved the empire." "I saved my investment," I corrected weakly, though the adrenaline of the corporate slaughter was rapidly fading, replaced by the heavy, intoxicating warmth of the man holding me. "Technically, since I own 50% of the voting shares now, it's our empire." Damien shifted, gently turning me around in his arms until I was straddling his lap on the rug. The dim blue light from the television cast sharp shadows across his face. He looked exhausted, rumpled, and more devastatingly handsome than he ever did in his tailored boardroom suits. He reached up, his thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw. "The fake engagement contract is officially void," Damien murmured, his icy blue eyes locking onto mine entirely unguarded. "The clause is permanently broken. No more billing for proximity. No more itemized waist grabs." "It's a shame," I teased softly, resting my hands on his chest. "I was making a fortune off your longing stares." "Harper," Damien said, his voice dropping into a serious, quiet register that made my breath catch. "Do you want to know when I actually fell in love with you?" I blinked, genuinely surprised. I assumed it was when I color-graded the security footage to catch your intern. Or maybe tonight, when I executed the Pac-Man defense. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "It was at La Toile. The restaurant." I stared at him. "The night you dumped me?" "The night you dumped me," he corrected. I walked into that restaurant expecting the Harper I had always known. The one who clung to my arm for social status, who threw tantrums over designer bags, who I thought I could buy off with a piece of paper. And instead, he paused, letting out a soft sigh, his hands sliding to rest on my waist. "Instead, you looked at the $50 million check, asked if it was tax-free, signed your name, and walked out without looking back. You didn't cry. You didn't yell. You just took the severance package and left me sitting there with a 10-carat ring and a profound, agonizing realization that I had just let the most fascinating woman in the world slip through my fingers." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "You were engaged to an intern 2 days later." "I was in denial," Damien confessed, his gaze dropping to my lips. "I spent 2 weeks staring at the door of my office, waiting for you to walk back in and demand your spot back. When you finally did, and you started auditing my company, I knew I was never letting you go again." The room was silent, save for the soft crash of the Malibu waves outside the glass doors. "I don't want a fake contract, Harper," Damien whispered, his hands tightening on my waist, pulling me impossibly closer. "I want you, the brilliant, ruthless, terrifying woman who hijacked my life, permanently." I looked down at the man who had completely surrendered his icy empire just to sit on a rug with me. I reached up, threading my fingers through his dark hair. "Well, Damien," I breathed, closing the last few inches between us. "It's a good thing I'm not accepting any other clients." I kissed him, and for the first time since I woke up in this ridiculous, high-stakes novel, I wasn't calculating margins, tracking stock prices, or worrying about the plot. I was just exactly where I wanted to be. Chapter 12. 2 weeks later, we were back in New York, standing in the exact same boardroom where I had first audited Damien's spectacular security failure. The atmosphere, however, was entirely different. The long obsidian table was polished to a mirror shine. Sitting nervously on one side were the remnants of the Zenith Corp board of directors. Sitting at the head of the table was Damien, looking like an apex predator in a tailored midnight blue suit. I was sitting in my newly designated chair directly to his right, wearing a sharp, blood-red blazer, and drinking an iced matcha latte. "The paperwork is finalized," Gregory the CFO announced, his hands trembling slightly as he passed a massive stack of bound documents down the table. Vance Industries has successfully absorbed Zenith Corp's remaining assets, debt, and intellectual property, including the AI microchips. The former Zenith executives looked like they were attending their own funerals. The CEO, a sweating man named Richard, practically lunged for his pen to sign the surrender documents. "Pleasure doing business with you, Richard," I said brightly, taking a sip of my matcha. "I highly recommend you look into early retirement. I hear Malibu is lovely this time of year, though the seagulls are fiercely territorial." Richard didn't respond. He just signed his company away and fled the boardroom, followed closely by his terrified executives. Once the heavy oak doors clicked shut, leaving just me and Damien in the sprawling executive suite, I let out a long, satisfied sigh. "Well," I said, spinning my chair slightly to face him, "the hostile takeover is officially complete. We own the chip, we own the market, and my $50 million investment just tripled in value. I'd say this was a highly successful business trip." Damien didn't say anything. He stood up from his chair, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked over to my side of the table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black leather portfolio, setting it gently on the glass in front of me. "What is this?" I asked, eyeing the leather cautiously. "If this is another temporary engagement contract, I am quadrupling my daily rate." "Open it," he murmured. I flipped the leather cover back. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, watermarked corporate stationery. It wasn't an invoice, and it wasn't a fake PR agreement. It was a legally binding transfer of corporate power. Position: Co-Chief Executive Officer. Voting power: 50%, 50%. Stake in Vance Industries Global. I stared at the document, my accountant brain completely short-circuiting. "Damien," I breathed, looking up at him. This is half your company. This is half your empire. You're giving me equal board control." "I'm not giving it to you," Damien corrected softly, resting his hands on the armrests of my chair and leaning down. "You earned it. You hijacked my company, saved my flagship product, and bailed out my stock with your own severance package. You are the only person on this planet who is my exact equal." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't pop it open to reveal the ridiculously large, 10-carat diamond I had left on his desk weeks ago. Instead, he opened it to reveal a sleek, elegant band made of brushed black titanium, the exact same material as my exclusive offshore credit card. "I know you don't care about the diamonds, or the high society galas, or the useless socialite titles," Damien whispered, his icy blue eyes melting into pure, undeniable warmth. "But I also know you care about incredibly secure investments." I let out a wet, breathless laugh, a single tear escaping and tracking down my cheek. "Are you proposing to me with corporate stock and a titanium band?" "I am proposing a permanent, irrevocable merger," Damien said, a brilliant, arrogant smile breaking across his face. "Be my co-CEO, Harper. Marry me. Let's terrorize Wall Street together." "I accept your terms," I whispered, pulling him down by his expensive silk tie. When he kissed me, it wasn't a fake PR stunt for the cameras. It was a perfectly executed, completely irreversible takeover. Epilogue. 3 years later, the wraparound deck of the Malibu beach house was bathed in the golden light of a California sunset. The ocean breeze was warm, and the sound of the crashing waves was perfectly synchronized with the clinking of champagne glasses. We were hosting a private, highly exclusive dinner party for the Vance Industries executive board. I was lounging on my favorite outdoor sofa, wearing a comfortable linen dress, and holding a glass of vintage sparkling wine. Beside me, Damien was casually leaning against the glass railing, looking devastatingly handsome and terrifyingly relaxed. He hadn't worn a tie on the West Coast in 2.5 years. Gregory, the CFO, approached us, holding a sleek silver tablet, and looking incredibly nervous. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance," Gregory stammered, adjusting his glasses. "The legal department just sent over the finalized documents for the new European tech acquisition. They also attached a standard post-nuptial update form for routine asset protection." I slowly lowered my champagne glass. I looked at Gregory. Then I looked at Damien. "A post-nuptial update," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "To protect whose assets, exactly?" Gregory visibly started sweating. "Just standard corporate procedure, ma'am. To ensure the Vance legacy is." I burst out laughing, the sound echoing across the wooden deck. I handed my glass to Damien and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Gregory, you can tell the legal department that they are wasting their billable hours, I said cheerfully. Damien and I already have a very clear understanding regarding our assets. We do? Damien asked, raising a single, highly amused eyebrow as he took a sip of my champagne. Yes, we do, I reminded him, looking up at my husband with a shark-like smile. If you ever try to divorce me, Damien, my new buyout clause isn't $50 million. My buyout clause is the entire company. I will legally liquidate your remaining shares, fire your legal team, and turn the New York headquarters into a giant, multi-level yarn storage facility. Gregory gasped, clutching the tablet to his chest as if I had just threatened his firstborn child. Damien didn't look threatened at all. He looked entirely, hopelessly captivated. He handed the champagne glass back to me, waved a dismissive hand at the terrified CFO, and closed the distance between us. He sat down on the sofa, wrapping his arms securely around my waist, and pulling me against his side. Cancel the post-nup, Gregory, Damien ordered smoothly, pressing a kiss to my temple. My wife's terms are completely non-negotiable, and I am perfectly happy to be held hostage. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.